Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to another edition of Vinyl Thoughts and finally another video about hip hop. So for those of you who didn't see it, several months ago I put out a Vinyl Thoughts video where I talked about 10 hip hop albums that I have on vinyl from the 80s. Not necessarily my top 10, just 10 that I wanted to talk about. And for the most part, it got a pretty good reception considering I don't talk about hip hop that much on this channel. So I thought I would come back again and do the same thing with the 90s. So here I am once again, and I've selected 10 albums from the 90s, all of which I have OG original pressings from the 90s. And they're ones that, you know, some are favorites, some I just like. But they were just the ones that kind of stood out, and I said I'm gonna talk about these. And I also tried to not repeat any artists from last time. So any 80s artists that put out shit in the 90s, I'm not really covering them. So EPMD doesn't get well, they get a mention now. Funny enough, they'll get a mention a bit later too. Yeah, these are just 10 albums from the 90s that I dig. And it was hard too because there's a lot, like I love 80s hip hop and the golden age hip hop from the 80s to the 90s. But for some reason, the 90s, especially the first half of the 90s, there's so many good albums that some of them I left behind just because I'm like, I feel like a lot of people talk about this album and I don't really have anything interesting to say about it. So anyway, enough of my fooling around. Let's get started with the first of 10 90s hip hop albums. All right, I'm gonna go in order as they were released. So let's just start off in the year 1990 with a debut album. Honestly, all of these I'm talking about are debuts except for one of them. So that says a lot about the strength of the debut albums that were coming out. But this one's a classic. Probably one I don't need to mention, but let's do it anyway because it's a fucking classic. The debut album from A Tribe Called Quest, People's Instinctive Travels and the Paths of Rhythm, which is an absolute classic. And it is the introduction of the crew led by Q-Tip. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of Q-Tip on this album. There's not a whole lot of Phife Dawg, because from what I've heard, like not everybody was as involved as Q-Tip. Q-Tip is also a very intricate kind of a producer and musician, so it kind of makes sense. But it doesn't matter because the vibe of A Tribe Called Quest is immediately very clear on this, and it's fun, it's light, it's got some jazziness to it. It's just a feel good kind of hip hop album. And this is a 1990 pressing. Let's take a look at the innards here. There's the dudes right there, and then on the back you get this really cool sort of psychedelic picture of the dudes. And then let's look at the record. The record here. So this is on Jive. Is it the right way around? Look at that right off the bat. Jive Records, and yeah. I feel like I don't really need to say anything about this album. A lot of people have talked about it, and the status of it being a classic and it being important in the growth of the alternative hip hop kind of scene is already been more than discussed. So you don't need me, but that's the first one I decided to talk about. Tribe Called Quest, People's Instinctive Travels and the Paths of Rhythm. All right, moving forward to 1991, another debut. The self-titled debut album from Cypress Hill. This one was a big deal because when it came out, so in 1990, I wasn't really listening to A Tribe Called Quest. I knew them, but they weren't like really on my radar. This album was big time on my radar when it came out. And I remember the first time I heard the song Hand on the Pump, and I was just like, what the fuck is this? And I had to get it. I originally had it on CD. But this is I believe this is a European pressing, and there's no bells and whistles here. Like it's just the thing. Is there even an insert? No, there's no insert. But that's it. And then you get the record here on Columbia Records. But this was a cool debut when it came out because there was the gangsta rap thing had pretty much already happened, but it hadn't blown up because The Chronic hadn't come out yet. And when this came out, it was like a very, to me, as a young person when this came out, it was a very different kind of sound because I'm like, this, it sounds like it's from the streets, but at the same time, it's kind of a fun stoner kind of album at the same time because there's a lot of weed talk on this album. And it's the first time you get to hear, you know, Be Real and Sin Dog and their unique deliveries. And this album to me is just like, they've done a lot of good albums and they're still like a hip hop group that if they put something out new, I'm interested in hearing it. But it's for me, it never lives up to the debut. There's such a crazy energy in this album that I had to talk about it, Cypress Hill. Okay, let's move forward to 1992. Another album that was a big deal for me when it came out. I heard the first single off of this album and I was like, I've never heard anything like this. This has to be mine when it comes out. The album was Dead Serious by Das EFX. And the big thing about this was obviously the vocal delivery here, because it became kind of a thing that rappers would do, but I don't remember hearing it before Das EFX with like the biggity, biggity, biggity kind of shit. I can't do it. I'm not a rapper. But it sounds cooler than that when they did a lot of iggities in their shit. And Das EFX were like the weirdest rappers at that point I'd heard, because everything, especially in They Want Effects, I believe it was the second single off of this album, there's just so many like pop culture references just thrown in, and it to the point where it's at first listen I'm like, what the hell are they even talking about? There is a lot more going on in the lyrics when you really kind of listen to it. They were just kind of cleverly kind of masking what they were saying in a really fun way. But this is another one that like doesn't get old, because I don't think anything mastered this kind of sound the way Das EFX did on this album. There's the dudes right there. And speaking of, because I was going to bring up EPMD, EPMD were a big reason why Das EFX got signed and this album got made. I think it was actually recorded in EPMD's studio, and originally, like I think the song ideas and the demos were like bounced off of those guys. So I think they get an executive producer credit on here. But this is one of those that it borders on, have people talked about this a lot or have they not? Because if you don't know this, then seek this one out, because it's still pretty fucking unique. Dead Serious. I forgot to show the record. There you go. Literally nothing fancy. Just a pretty bland. A lot of these, especially the ones as we get into later into the 90s, they're European pressings, because in America, all of a sudden CDs were all the thing, and so there weren't as many vinyl versions made. Sometimes there were no US vinyl pressings made at all, and I believe this is one of them. I think this might be a German pressing. So anyway, okay, moving on. All right, we're sticking around in 1992 for another classic, Mecca and the Soul Brother, Pete Rock and CL Smooth. This is a fucking great album, and this, if I was going to give a really great example of a producer or beat maker putting together beats that perfectly fit the tone of the vocalist that they're supporting, like this is it. Like Pete Rock's production on this, CL Smooth's vocals, they just seem like they're literally made for each other. It sounds so good. But aside from classic tracks like They Reminisce Over You and For Pete's Sake, which is one of my favorites, it's literally just chock full of cool shit. And it's a double vinyl. Got a couple extra tracks on it as well. Once again, this is a European pressing of this. Let's take a look at it. So we got the two records here. See, there you go. I don't know exactly. Oh, it's just black. Nothing there. Nothing on that side either. There you go. It's just pretty bare bones. But like I said, I think at this point, like, if you weren't a DJ who was spinning records, I don't think anyone was buying them, especially in America. So there you go. Another very plain looking label. Nothing special going on there. We don't even need to look at the other one. But this is another one of those classics that is bordering on, do people talk about it a lot or don't they? I've heard some talk, but this really isn't something that I see come up a lot, which is weird, because I feel like it's an album that should come up a lot. So there you go, Mecca and the Soul Brother from Pete Rock and CL Smooth. All right, we're staying in 92 again. 92 was a big year for hip hop. And honestly, I'm not even talking about a couple of the biggest albums in 92. But I am going to talk about what I think is my favorite hip hop album of all time. On the last episode that I did of the 80s, I believe I said that possibly 3 Feet High and Rising by De La Soul is my favorite hip hop album of all time. But I thought about that and I went, I don't think so. There's one album that has stuck with me. Like ever since it came out in the 90s, it was really big for me in high school. And it's one of those albums that's just stayed in rotation forever. For how many fucking years has it been? 30 years? Fuck, I don't know. But this is probably it. You can quote me on that. Bizarre Ride to the Far Side, the debut album from The Far Side. This is pretty much perfect, in my opinion. I guess it depends on what you're wanting out of your hip-hop album. If you want things to be a little more straightforward and serious, this is not what you want. This is a fun album, and it's a really out-there album, and it's a very unique album with I guess you could say that, you know, if you want to trace it back to De La Soul and Tribe, like we talked earlier, they all led up to albums like this, where I think the alternative hip hop kind of thing was at its best. And this is just amazing song after amazing song, and it's just a fun ride. They should have called it the Fun Ride, because it's what it fucking is. I guess it's a little bizarre, but and this is a cool, once again, this is an original copy. It's a European pressing. And as you can see on the label, this is for DJs only. I don't know how I got a copy of it, but you know, I got one. Anyway, so then there's a little insert with the picture of the dudes. And then it comes on 2 different colored vinyl. I think they did a repressing where they actually redid them on these colors. So you have one that's like a goldish, yellowish kind of color. Pretty damn cool. And then the other one is blue. And this is a double disc, but I think once you get a little bit further into the 90s, albums became longer, especially hip-hop albums. And this is one of those cases where it's pretty long and I don't care. There's no bad song. There's no dull moment. It easily is my favorite hip-hop album of all time. And also there's a little order form in here for some delicious vinyl stuff. If you want to, like, you know, send your cash or your check, write out a check, remember that, and send off for some shirts. But anyway, I don't know what else I can say about Far Side. That may be one that people talk about a lot, but there's no fucking way I could leave it out from my video. One of my favorite albums of all time, and probably, we're going to say my favorite hip-hop album of all time. Bizarre Ride to the Far Side. All right, let's move into 93, but let's keep the party going big time. 21 and Over by TheAlcoholics. TheAlcoholics. This is their debut album, and this has got to be the ultimate party album. It feels like every time I hear this album, I just imagine that when they were recording it, there was a party going outside of the studio, and as each one of the guys finished recording whatever he was recording, they would just go out and drink and party and then bring that vibe right back into the studio, because it's chock full of that kind of shit. And this one is also one that has literally nothing going on the inside of it. I mean, it's just a plain white sleeve and then the bare bones label. I mean, at this point, like 93, you're getting more into the land of vinyl isn't cool anymore and nobody was buying it. Isn't it weird that we've come full circle? I guess we haven't really come full circle, but maybe eventually we will. Maybe eventually vinyl will be the #1 way everyone listens to music. I doubt it. But anyway, Alcoholics, 21 and Over. If you want to have a good time, start right here. All right, we're going to hang out in 93 for a little bit, because that was also a pretty good year for hip-hop. With this one, Into the Stage from Black Moon. Now, this is one I'm pretty sure doesn't get talked about that much, because I don't ever see it. But it should, because it's a fucking strong album. Once again, debut album from Black Moon. And this is just a fucking... It's hard to explain, because there is a quality of this that has like that sort of, when you got into the 90s and you had other artists that were doing a little more of a serious spin on hip hop, and then you got Black Moon, who have kind of that same thing going on, but the production on this album, the best way I can describe it is it's understated, which is kind of cool. It gives the album a very kind of cool, breezy kind of feeling, even though it's not a lighthearted album. And then there you go. There's the label there, and this album kind of like the first Tribe album, I guess because I don't know exactly why, but one of the rappers, Buckshot, like he is the only rapper on I think like 2/3 of the album, and but it doesn't matter because the dude's fucking great. But this has just got a lot of great fucking songs on it. But I think the classic is Who Got the Props. Just look that one up because it's just you'll get what I'm talking about the sort of smooth vibe that this album has. But it's God, this is a really good one. Black Moon, Enter the Stage. All right, staying in '93 and talking about another absolute classic of the alternative hip hop era of the '90s. 93 Till Infinity by Souls of Mischief. This is another one of those that I'm just like, why don't people talk about this album more than they do? This should be on top 10 of the 90s lists, no matter what. This should be a shoo-in. Go ahead, list The Chronic, list Wu-Tang, but this one has to go in there because it's so fucking good. And the song, the title track, 93 Till Infinity, is easily not only one of my favorite hip hop songs, but one of my favorite songs. Like you have those songs that you put them on and the vibe immediately makes you feel good no matter what's going on in your life. And that song and this album is a good example of that. This is, once again, this is a European pressing of this. You got the hieroglyphics symbol because they were part of the hieroglyphics collective with Del the Funky Homo Sapien. Who else was in that? I'm blanking. But there was, there were at the time they were just starting to boom with all of the artists in that. And this is a Jive Records right there, pretty basic. And then, but yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about this album aside from if you want your music to feel good. That's literally that's all I can say about Souls of Mischief. It's just great hip hop that feels good. So there you go, 93 Till Infinity. All right, now we're gonna jump over 1994 into 1995 for what I think is probably the least known album of the 10 that I'm gonna talk about, but it's another one that should be talked about a lot. This is the debut album from the group Channel Live called Station Identification. And it's a duo, and I guess I can, some of these artists that I really like from the 90s, I can see why they weren't super successful because they don't have any kind of gimmick that like makes them stand out. They're just good at what they do. And this is one of those albums that's it's really good for what it is. And you get some production and some vocals by KRS-One on this album. And I'd suggest go listen to the song Madism, which was I think the biggest single off of this, and you'll get a good idea of what the vibe on this is like. This one is it's basic, but at least it's got like a logo on it. But then you get to the label, and it's like, there you go. And I think this is one of those cases where this album was so small, even though it's on a major, that I think this is the only vinyl pressing there is of it. Not the one I own, but you know what I mean. But I highly recommend it if you're a fan of hip hop and you just like hearing it done really well, and there's no bells and whistles, there's no gimmicks. It's just straightforward, really solid hip hop. Then Channel Live is an album that you should already know. But I think it's fucking great. So I had to fucking talk about it. Station Identification. All right, for the last album of this video, we're moving into 1996, my senior year of high school. Another kind of unknown album. I think it's known, but there's probably a good amount of you that don't know it. Firing Squad from MOP, not their debut album. We've got one. This is their second album. And this is, I think it falls under the same kind of thing that Channel Live falls under, where they don't sound alike, but there's not really, it's just a really great hip hop album. But for what was going on in '96, if you were just a casual hip hop listener, this wasn't anything that was going to stand out. Although, like, I think the vocal deliveries on here, it's pretty fucking, like, it makes me feel tired. Like, there were those rappers around that time, Onyx comes to mind, like groups where it almost seemed like they were yelling at you the whole time, and you're just like the stamina that it takes to do this is like up there with like death metal vocals, because I'm just like, you're shouting for the whole album, and it's urgency from beginning to end on this album. And I'd look up the track Firing Squad, the title track, if you want to get a good idea of what these guys sound like. But it's a pretty cool, kind of raw, I guess, hip hop album for the time. But it's just pure energy from beginning to end, and I highly recommend it. So that's the final one that I decided to talk about, a Firing Squad from MOP. So there you have it. There were some absolute bangers that I left out to narrow it down to 10. And also some from great 80s artists that also put out really quality shit in the 90s. But just for now, since this is only the second video about my hip-hop collection that I've done, I'm kind of try to keep it a little bit concise. But if you guys dig this kind of shit, I'll probably come back with another one. Maybe I'll do my full-on top 10 hip-hop albums of all time. Because, God, that'll be fucking tough. I think I can do it, though. But for right now, that's just 10 90s hip hop albums that I really like, and I think if you're into that kind of thing, if you haven't heard some of those, go check them out. If you have, thanks for sticking around and watching me talk about these albums, because I don't really think I have anything unique to bring to the table. I just really like this music, and I really like talking about music. So thank you for watching, and I will see you all again very soon.